Kennedy with you here. How about modified food starch? If you look in a lot of things you buy, it has modified food starch. So we're going to talk about it with bread. A lot of times you'll see it in bread. Why do they use it? What is it? And can you use it too? Sort of. So they take the starch out of potatoes, tapioca, corn. There's several different things, vegetable-based things they can pull the starch out of. But then they've got the starch, and to make it work a little bit better for their purposes, they do something to it. That might be heating it up, doing something chemically to it, or that changes it somehow. Cooking does too, but they alter it somehow so that when they put it into a loaf of bread, it improves the loaf of bread. Now, what does it improve? Well, if we look at the regular modified food starch, we see that it helps the bread retain moisture longer. That means it doesn't go stale as quick, which is really good. It improves dough handling. Sometimes with dough, if you're trying to get it in a certain shape, it just the gluten isn't relaxed, and so you pull it and it goes back. So it would help with that. There's some other things too, but normally the thing that I'm gonna kind of key in on here is the moisture retention. And we can get that same effect with unmodified food starch in the form of, got in the habit of putting bags, some of these things that absorb water, just in bags. This is the winter now, so our house is really dry, but we're on a slab, and so during the rest of the year, there's a lot of moisture in the house. But bag of instant potatoes. So we can use this and get that same effect. Probably the modified food starch would be better, but just using dehydrated potato flakes helps a lot. So what do you want to do? Well, you're going to add it roughly. You're going to be putting a tablespoon of the flakes in for every cup of flour you put in. So my bread machine typically uses, from say 3 to 4.5 cups of flour. It's one of these nice Zuritsu machines. It's got the double paddles, the horizontal thing, the bread pan, and it's now time to put my dinner in the oven. Getting back to the bread. So you add around a tablespoon of potato flakes, dehydrated potato, for a cup of flour that you use. And then you can also add 1 to 2 times the volume in water. So that would be, say I put in 3 tablespoons of water, of the dehydrated potato flakes. I would put in probably 6 tablespoons extra of water. Now, with bread flour, I think it's not as critical as with some other flours. I think if you were doing more things with things that are more whole wheat, or certain types of bread with lower gluten content, maybe that would be a little more critical. But normally it's not that critical when you're using, a standard bread flour. I just buy. I don't buy the King Arthur. Everybody buys the King Arthur because they say it's more consistent, and maybe it is, but it's a couple bucks more a bag, so I don't buy it. I buy the other bread flours, and it seems to work fine. But anyway, so you put this in, and now you can just walk away from your bread machine and wait for the results. But if you're like me and you don't want to waste things, you check it in a little while and take a look at what it's doing. And you can see, and you should do it when you're doing the first few times you do this potato thing, you can see what the bread looks like. And with that, you can determine whether you need to add more water or if you need to add more flour because you've added too much water. And that usually comes about by learning to see how smooth it looks, the dough looks. If you calculate it horribly, the thing's just all kinds of, surface texture to it and everything, and it's sticking to the walls of the thing, and it looks horrible. If you get the right amount, it's a pretty smooth textured ball. And, it's gonna, with the two paddles, it's gonna be, a little bit larger maybe than a single paddle. And it's not going to be like where I've mistakenly added way too much water or not enough flour. It will actually look kind of soupy. It will be on the paddles, but it will be down on the entire floor of the bread pan too. So it is possible to lose count when you're making bread. You wouldn't think so when you're counting the big number. You got to count up to 3 or 4 accurately, and somehow you can make a mistake doing that. I know I have. So what can I say? But anyway, back to it. So add this in, the water in, give your machine a little check, look what's going on, and if you're getting good results with your bread machine now, you should start looking at it at a certain time after it's all incorporated everything, and look and say, oh, I know what that looks like. And then when you do something where you might have to adjust things a little, you'll know what it's supposed to look like for the same flour type. So anyway, what we're going to get with this is we're going to get a loaf of bread that doesn't turn stale as quickly. And something I read too said this is actually going to help it not to mold as quickly as well, because even though it's retaining the moisture, which you can tell when you're eating it, or the fact that the texture is nice, it's holding the water in such a way that it isn't as easily accessible, for mold to form. And that's what we want. We want bread to last longer. And why, with bread machines, you need that minimum amount to put in there. You can't take a bread machine like I have and say, oh, I'll scale this down and I'll make it a recipe with only 1 cup of flour. And that's gonna be a disaster in that, because the paddles will be turning and there'll be a bunch of stuff that isn't incorporated. So even if you incorporated it before you put it in, mixed it all up well and put it in, it still isn't going to come out right, because the paddles just aren't going to work properly with that small amount of material dough. So now, if you've got the old KitchenAid or some type of mixer like that with a dough hook, and then that you could scale down if you wanted to. But here we want it to be simple. We want to be able to figure out, we put it in, figure out what water works for us, we put it in, we get it out, the loaf is going to last a lot longer. Now, normally, when there's a group of people around, homemade bread does not last long enough for you to worry about it getting stale. But, if there's only 2 of you, or especially if there's 1 of you, sometimes there's 2 or 3 of us, that bread can go pretty quick, because it's just so good. It's kind of, you don't want to buy a bread machine if you're dieting. Let me put it that way. Okay, normally you get store bread, right? And what do you do with store sliced bread? You do something to it to make it edible. You put cheese in it. You put bologna or turkey, or, make all kinds of sandwich things. You dip it in eggs and cook it like French toast. You toast it and put butter on it and jelly and all these things. And that kind of is almost like the store sandwich bread. The thing is just an edible vehicle for what you're putting in between. But see, when you start making your own bread, you want to eat the bread just because the bread is so good. So it's like, oh, I don't need that other stuff in it. Oh, I'm going to eat the bread, and you end up eating way too much. It ends up, if you have a 2-pound loaf of homemade bread and a 2-pound loaf of store bread, and you fed them to identical people, the people with the homemade bread would need more bread sooner, because they're just going to eat so much more of it because it tastes good. But anyway, give that a try. You'll be using unmodified food starch, dehydrated potatoes. Put it in there, about a tablespoon per cup of flour, and maybe add, like I say, a tablespoon or two per tablespoon of flakes. So you take that number. Say again, you're using 3 tablespoons. You can decide to put 3 to 6 tablespoons more of water in it, and go from there. And see if you like it. See if it improves the texture of the bread, how long the bread is going to keep, and you might like it or not. Bye.